We open our scene on the long, winding, craggy road up to the monastery of St. Timothy. It's been roughly an hour since the Lambs of Isaac were set upon on the road by the hunters that were sent by the Inquisition. One of them led by an elite knight. And of course, last when we left off, the Lambs of Isaac had engaged in single combat with the Knight of the Broken Cross of Acre, Badiun Libretum. And in the ensuing struggle, Guermin de Gascoigne fell into torpor, just as he was slaying Baudian. Still covered in gore, the young cainites have been walking along the road for roughly an hour or so. And in the distance, in the midst of the night which hangs like a heavy pall over the Transylvania wilderness, we see the monastery of St. Timothy in the distance, cutting a silhouette of its edifices against the night sky. It is a crescent moon tonight. And in the distance you see the walls, the low stone walls, and the high towering abbey, which dominates the very center of the courtyard. And the camera is going to focus in on the Lambs of Isaac as Guermin is currently unconscious and in torpor, and it's been, like I said, roughly an hour since that last event took place. And disheveled and in disarray, we look now to the Lambs of Isaac. We're going to start on, as the camera focuses in on Diego to begin with.
Diego has stayed quiet most of the journey. He's turned most of his introspection. And there's the door. Inconvenient. Hang on 1 second, guys. Sorry.
No problem. You gotta go back to work.
Wouldn't that just be wonderful?
The answer in that situation is no.
No, I do not have to go back to work.
Did we get horses the last time?
Mm-hmm.
Yep, I seem to remember you guys confiscating some of the horse, at least one horse, right?
Yeah, I think Diego and Julieta are walking, but Valentino's on the horse with Guermin's torpored body.
I got a couple horses, but I'm just walking them.
Oh, okay.
So nobody has animal ken, huh? Check.
Yeah, we kind of figured that out early on.
I'll never need it.
That's not a useful skill. We need some brawl.
Well, all of you guys are men, so I have an excuse. My character wouldn't have really needed any of that.
You don't like cats?
Oh.
Oh,
All
shit.
right, well, that was a crazy story right there.
Welcome back, Scott.
It's ointment for that bird.
All right, so go ahead and launch us back into the description.
He's just been quietly watching after the body of Garamond, wondering to himself if he's ever going to wake up. He has no idea how long this is going to last.
And after that violent conflict, what does Diego look like? Is he, in what ways is he disheveled? I mean, is he spattered in blood or dirt? What does he look like?
Well, after ramming the sword through the knight's chest, he did get quite a bit of arterial spray on him, so he does look rather like he just walked out of a charnel house. He's also filthy from rolling around in the dirt, trying to leap on top of the other knights. But all the same, with his pale face and curly hair, he still cuts a striking figure.
And even though he might be covered in the residue of conflict, Diego remains something eerie to look at, and it's a testament to his clan. The camera is going to shift now to Giulietta de Florence as we catch up with her and see, focus in on her for the moment.
Giulietta very, very much looks somewhat similar to Diego, but probably more horrifying than he, for she had dug her entire face into the open wound of that man, that knight that she had pulled, decapitated him, and her face had been covered. I mean, the whole front of her has dried blood all down her dress, but her face had also been covered in just a thick layer of blood that she had sort of wiped away with her sleeves, but the remnants of it is still there, and she's a terrifying sight. I mean, if any strangers come upon them. She's dirty, her hair is, almost in a rat's nest, and the whole time they've been walking, her thoughts have kind of been scattered, going from one thing to another. But she has been, from time to time, looking to Garamond, sort of waiting for him to just wake up, but it hasn't occurred yet. And she's just as clueless as probably the others are in terms of what's going on with him and how they're going to wake him up.
And with that, the camera is going to shift finally to Valentino.
Valentino's been leading the two horses and the group. One of the horses carrying Garamond, and you can see that he has dried blood near his chin where he was trying to feed, and his hands and wrists and sleeves are very bloody from the many stabbings and slashings he was doing. And he looks visibly agitated and irritated. Killing 3 knights took absolutely everything he had, and he feels drained. He can think of barely anything besides the woman in Balgrad he fed on, both in shame and desperate hunger. He can barely keep his mind straight. He hasn't felt hunger like this in basically since his creation. So he's trying to just look ahead and finish their journey as soon as they can.
And as I said, after almost an hour of traveling along the road, you can finally see the monastery in the distance. It's about 100 yards off. And as the Lambs of Isaac approach the monastery, I'm going to turn the scene over to the three of you.
I do not know who will greet us here. Hopefully someone who will not mind so much bloodshed.
Giulietta kind of shrugs at Valentino's response. Well, we can say we were just attacked.
Fine. Valentino barely puts up a fight to argue.
Diego's lips just draw into a brief sneer.
Let us see.
Giulietta, she looks back over to Valentino after a moment. You still have the letter, yes?
Valentino searches himself to see if he can find it again, barely having his wits about him. Yes, it does look like I still have it. Let's see who we can find up ahead.
Julietta nods and looks forward.
How do we know they didn't come from here?
We do not. But we do not have much choice now. The sun surely will rise soon, and we do not have many other options now.
Then yes, let us explain to a bunch of priests why we need to sleep during the day.
Valentino flashes an irritated look towards Diego, remains silent.
It's not our best idea.
Julietta kind of looks from Valentino over to Diego and then speaks up. Well, whoever these priests are that work at this monastery, I'm sure they're in on these undead who live amongst them. It seems that it's like that everywhere we go.
This Japheth maintains his home here. It sounded as if these monks may serve him in some way. They cannot be entirely in the dark.
Julietta nods in agreement.
Of course it makes sense, but I still worry, of course. Should we, clean ourselves up first, perhaps?
Do you see any water that we can make use of?
Diego's mind briefly flashes to an image of him pissing all over Valentino, but he banishes it quickly.
Julietta will pause a moment and look around them. Is there any water nearby?
No, not that you can see. The Morosol River was left back at the main road like over an hour ago.
She shrugs.
Very well then, let's get on with it.
Valentino continues to lead the two horses up to anything resembling a front entrance.
Alright. And as Valentino falls silent, do Julietta and Diego do as well?
Diego does, but he passes Julietta a look. A long, suffering look.
Julietta looks back to Diego. She acknowledges his eyes upon her, and after a moment she too looks forward, and she'll follow Valentino and the horses. But she does kind of keep a keen eye on the remote area that they're now entering in terms of the monastery. She's going to keep an eye on anything odd or out of the ordinary.
Alright, and with that, we're going to shift scene as the camera pulls away and we see the dark figures of the cainites upon the road approach the monastery, which looms in the distance still. The monastery of St. Timothy sits amidst a beautiful garden that looks lush even at night. The tall wooden doors are not bound at all with any sort of iron locks, any kind of fortification. In fact, they sit ajar even at this hour, which is such a remote location, deep in the Carpathian wilderness. As the three of you, encumbered by Gehrman's torpid form, pass through the doors, you can see the hooded and robed forms of the monks moving amidst the courtyard, and you can see the moonlight as it shines down. All the colorful buds are silver and white, luminescent at the moon that seems to light everything up in this courtyard, and you can tell that the air is heady with the scent of healing herbs and flowers. Solemn in the midst of the flora, you can see the modest building in the center is silent at night, except for the sound of crickets, and dark save for a few candles in the windows. As the three of you approach the still monastery, you can hear deep voices raised in reverent chant from within. None of the monks in the courtyard seem to pay you much mind. There are a dozen that you can see engaged in nocturnal prayer. There are, however, two that approach you after a moment of remaining still, and as you see the two monks approaching you, the camera is going to shift back to the three of you as I turn the scene over.
I don't like this.
Nocturnal prayer seems a bit odd, although perhaps reassuring that they do keep the same hours as this Japheth. I say we find what we can inside.
Julieta, she looks from Diego to Valentino, kind of a thoughtful look on her face as she takes only a semi-step away from them towards a little area nearby where there's flowers blooming, and she picks one of the flowers and just nonchalantly and brings it up to her nose to smell it, and then she catches out of the corner of her eye. You said there's two robed figures coming towards them, yes?
Yes.
She spots them and kind of gestures her head forward. Well, it seems they've already found us.
As the two robed figures approach, they pause before the three of you and seem to take note of your horses, and especially the man slung over the top of the mount. They address the man on the horse, which is, of course, Valentino. First in the native tongue of Romania, which none of you understand. What do you do in response as he says something to you in a language none of you comprehend?
Excuse me, do you by chance speak Italian?
Ah, yes, of course. He switches effortlessly into perfect Italian, which all of you manage to comprehend. And who, I may ask, is visiting our humble monastery this evening?
I'm afraid we are in need of refuge. We were attacked on the road, and our friend here is gravely injured.
This place of the Lord is a shelter for all in the dark wilderness. He motions to his companion, who moves to take Gehrman's body from the horse, unless, of course, he is stopped.
Where are you taking him?
He will be brought below to rest in the chambers there. Are you here to see anyone specific?
Valentino looks to his two companions briefly before kind of resigning himself on the only option. Japheth, We are here to see Japheth.
The man lowers his head, his hood obscuring his face completely for a moment. And even when he is standing upright, most of his face is covered by the hood. Yes, of course, you could have been no other. We don't often receive visitors so colorful. Your arrival was long expected. Please, if you would but divest yourselves of these animals, we will make sure that they are provided for, and we will bring you to Japheth.
Many thanks, sir. He dismounts and hands the reins over.
As though from the shadows, several monks emerge from out of the corner of your sight, and they, as if they were lingering there all along, you're not quite sure when they had crept up on you, but suddenly they're all around, and they're taking the reins of the horses, and several of them are helping carry the body of Gehrman away, for it is quite heavy. And the monk who had been speaking motions to the three of you as he turns to head towards the central building.
Diego looks to the other two and shrugs. He looks actually quite nervous.
And I should mention, the monk that you were speaking to and the monk that is leading you along, he looks quite young. He looks perhaps not even 20.
Julieta, she looks over to Diego, and then her eyes kind of wander back to the monks who are kind of encircling them, and her slender right hand slips the tiny bit of the flower behind her ear, pressing up against her entangled curls. And she's kind of studying the scene around them and awaiting their next move, awaiting for Valentino to lead, as he usually does.
Valentino follows this monk and looks behind him to see his companions and see if they're coming with.
Diego is indeed following.
And as the three of you emerge into the central building in the inner courtyard, you are led into the monastery and down stone stairs as shadows cloak the interior very heavily, except for the soft glow of a few candles. And you can hear the low, susurrant Latin chanting of the monks within, which kind of give a ghostly ambience to the place. And an echo that long follows you down those stone steps as you descend into air which becomes quite colder as you go down into the earth to the catacombs below. You pass rows of coffin slots in the walls as you walk into the twisting tunnels, and glimpses of old bones. The only light that the monk carries is a taper which he took from the wall before descending down. And as he leads you along, and you reach the lowest level of the monastery and are ushered into a room that is lit with a warm glow. However, this glow does not seem to originate from any single point. There are no tapers or fire in this room, and yet there's illumination all the same. In the center of the room, which is blanketed with an earthen floor, are 3 chairs at the far end. An altar remains on a raised dais behind them. The chair in the center is empty, and so is the one to the left. And yet seated on the chair on the right is what appears to be a rather short, thin man in a monk's robe and tonsure. Though he is relatively short and a slight man with an unassuming demeanor, Those who see this man are usually struck dumb by the aura of peace that surrounds him. It grips you the moment you enter the room, and you advance forward almost without thinking as the monk that had led you here remains behind at the doorway. An almost beatific feeling surrounds this man, usually attributed to those experiencing the presence of a saint. He appears like a youth, barely in his 20s. And as you enter the room, you know with a certainty that this could be no other than Japheth himself.
Diego can't help himself. He'll move forward and fall to his knees before the man and kiss his feet. Señor, solicitamos santuario, por favor. He's requesting sanctuary.
The monk, who could be no other than Japheth, reaches down and he touches you on your shoulders, almost so gentle, it's almost like his touch were floating across your body, and yet he lifts you up with a strength that is undeniable. Rise, brethren. Rise and find rest. Welcome. I am Japheth Capidocius, foremost son of the great Capidocius, an abbot of the monastery of the martyred St. Timothy. He lifts you up to your feet, Diego, and looks at you with a gaze that affixes you with an undeniable sense of peace that is overwhelming.
Diego almost feels the urge to cry, but he just looks at the man in his eyes and realizes he's seeing a saint walking here. These are the stories that his grandmothers told him.
Valentino, upon entering the room and feeling the presence of this man strike him, his eyes just go wide and his mouth starts to drop open. Having never been in the presence of a man so fundamentally spiritual or holy, he almost feels a little uncomfortable, not being very spiritual himself, and he's at a loss for words briefly before he regains himself. My lord Japheth, we bring a letter for you, my lord. A message.
Please, call me brother. There is only one lord in this place. Japheth lowers his head humbly, but he extends a hand nonetheless to receive the letter.
Valentino fumbles briefly for the letter, not losing his gaze on Japheth, before he retrieves a letter and hands it over.
He takes the letter and doesn't open it right away, to your surprise. In fact, he simply holds it as though patient in its own time, looking past the three of you towards where the young monk stands at the doorway. And the wounded one. He is being brought down into the monastery. Brother Japheth, his wounds are great. Bring him here, Japheth says, quite blankly, before the monk bows and turns to shuffle off into the darkness. After a moment, he looks down and begins unfolding the letter and begins reading it. He takes his time, and in the meantime, what are Julieta and Diego and Valentino doing?
Valentino can't keep his gaze off of Japheth. He stares at him like a living god.
Not knowing what to do, Diego takes a step back. But his thoughts are whirling right now. How can this creature before him be like he is? Clearly, Japheth is not cursed. Yet he was told that he was a cainite like they are.
Julieta, when they were walking into the room, she was kind of feeling some sort of strange sense come over her, and the moment that she looked upon Japheth, she began seeing this very strange. She can't even explain it. It's this aura kind of radiating off of him, and it was a very light shade of blue, and she if the others were to look at her, you can tell right away that something's catching her off guard, and this aura she's looking at upon this man has made her feel very at peace. She can tell right away he's very powerful, and it's almost immediately it's left her in awe. She's just as Diego and Valentino are feeling, she's probably feeling it tenfold concerning what had just happened only an hour ago when they were savagely attacked, and she had done some pretty vicious things, but all of a sudden it's like this overwhelming peace has come over her, and she's just staring at him almost in wonder and perplexity. She hasn't given her name, she hasn't spoken, but it's very strange. It's something she's never felt before.
And as he reads the letter, you see upon his serene face a look of tightening, a narrowing of his eyes that are almost imperceptible. He calmly folds the letter and holds it, lifting his head to look at the three of you. Those are grave charges. I must warn you, the Lord's penalties for false witness are severe. I shall commune with my father on this matter. But, until then, he lifts a hand and motions towards the doorway, drawing your attention to where the monks are bringing Gehrman's torpid form into the room. And as they do so, Daniel, go ahead and describe what we're seeing with Gehrman's torpid body.
Gehrman's body is hardly recognizable as a body. It's burned and charred. Hardly any patches of skin that aren't actually burned or scarred or slashed. And all along his back, it seems as though it has been opened by what appears to be large claws underneath all of the burned flesh. And his head is caved in almost completely on one side, and you can barely make out what used to be this once proud man's face.
And as the monks lay Gehrman's body upon the altar, you see Japheth push the sleeves of his robe slightly upward, up his forearms. And you can see the blush of life throughout his entire body. Indeed, he does not look like a cainite at all. He looks like a man, although you know with a certainty that he is far more than just a simple man. And as the monks bow and turn to shuffle from the room, he reaches out to touch Gehrman's torpid body. And immediately, the glow that suffuses this room from no known source sheds a slick, sanguine light as a red tone immediately fills the room, and light radiates from his hands as he reaches down to touch Gehrman's torpid body, as that glossy red, blood red light emanates in the entire room, illuminating the three of you as you watch in awe as Japheth touches Gehrman's body, and that smooth light radiates outward over Gehrman's flesh, knitting it together and healing his body, for lack of a better word. You see his flesh smooth over, the charred bits of skin begin to lighten out of its blackened char, and as his body begins to crack and you hear the bones shifting and grinding, as Japheth guides his hands, his touch, up towards Gehrman's head. You see right before your very eyes, in the bathing of that sanguine light, the reconstitution of his broken body. And immediately, Gehrman, your eyes open, not in frenzy, but in a sweet, invigorating energy that is rushing throughout your entire form. You realize that you are in the glow of this blood-red sanguine light, and the sense of peace that washes over you is unbelievable, as there is a young man in a monk's robe and a tonsure looking down at you with a face that is angelic almost in the serenity of his repose. As you watch this reconstitution of Gehrman's body, what do the three of you do as the camera shifts to Gehrman and Julieta, or Julieta and Diego and Valentino?
My God. I thought I had seen the extent of the greatest powers in this world. This is something else.
Julieta, her mouth is slightly agape, not fully, but just slightly enough, and her head's kind of tilting somewhat, and she takes a small step forward, more closer to where Valentino is standing, and her eyes narrow, studying what is happening. She's somewhat in disbelief.
Diego will actually fall to one knee again and make the sign of the cross over his chest. And then he'll bow his head in solemn prayer.
The camera shifts to Gehrman as he comes to and awakens.
As he lays there, Gehrman's eyes can't seem to fall anywhere else but on the face of this man. This boy, more or less. No, he utters no sound. His eyes are fixed and wide, as he just stares at the face of this boy in this red glowing light.
Japheth withdraws his hands, and as he does so, the light in the room seems to mimic his withdrawal as the blood-red light lightens once again into that soft, gentle, white glow as the light from his hands vanishes into nothing, and he folds his hands once more into the sleeves of his robe. Rise, Crusader.
Gehrman starts looking about as if confused or unsure or uncertain that he can, but refilled with courage from the man's words, he slowly begins to use his ab muscles to make him rise and slowly lean forward.
You have been restored. As I said to your companions, I am Japheth Capidocius, foremost son of the great Capidocius. I am the abbot of the monastery of the martyred St. Timothy here. Your companions brought you here.
How is this possible?
Many are possible by the powers of Cain. Many still are more possible by the grace of the Lord.
The true miracle worker.
Japheth smiles humbly. No, I am adequate. My abilities were not... He pauses. Let us say it's been many years. But these powers that have been thrust upon both you and me so many nights ago may be used for good or for ill, for the works of the Lord or the devil. It is up to each of us to make a choice, and I suspect that your coming here tonight is one step in that choice. What concerns me, Japheth looks down. His voice is as smooth as oil, I should mention. It's captivating watching this young man who nonetheless carries himself like a very humble but powerful figure in this room. As he unfolds this letter and looks it over, these charges against my brother Claudius are very concerning. If you will but give me a moment, I must commune with my father. And he bows at the waist to the four of you, just as you're rising from the altar, Gehrman. You can return to your feet. As Japheth turns to shuffle with gentle steps that make no sound upon the floor and resume his seat in that right chair, the middle and left chair near him completely empty of any occupant. He closes his eyes and goes into some kind of serene repose, sitting there for a moment, and though he is physically here, you get the distinct sense that he is somewhere else as he closes his eyes and withdraws into what is either prayer or meditation, you can't tell.
Gehrman will slowly turn, shifting his body to the edge of the table, directly facing the others. Brother? A confused look crosses his face.
Welcome back, my friend. Valentino finally shifts his gaze over to Gehrman.
Gehrman looks up to Valentino and gives him a stern nod as he steps off the table. What did he mean by his brother, Giovanni?
I did not understand entirely. Though I feel this is an individual who cannot be fully understood.
It's proof. It's a sign that one can live in the Lord's light with this curse.
See, Diego says from the floor where he's still taking a knee, and he turns to look at you, Gehrman. We cannot let Giovanni have him.
A very angry scowl crosses Gehrman's face. Never.
Julieta is kind of listening to the other three as they speak, and as she looks back to Japheth, she sort of takes a step back, and her thoughts kind of wander to the fight that they had only recently just encountered, like no more than an hour ago, and the viciousness she bestowed upon those men who attacked them. And though a part of her knows she was acting in self-defense of her and her companions, there is a small part of her that feels as though she enjoyed it. And she feels some sort of struggle within herself looking upon this man who is so, he just, he feels so holy. And the words he spoke to Gehrman kind of hit her a little bit. And it's almost as though she's having somewhat of an internal struggle between herself as she was immortal and herself now as a monster. But she doesn't speak any of this out loud. She only looks to the others, and her brow is internalizing all of this.
Does everyone remain silent, or do you wish to engage in dialogue while Jotheth meditates?
Perhaps we should leave him to his communion? He looks around.
He asked us to wait.
Valentino falls silent.
So everyone decides to wait?
Yes.
It doesn't take long, a minute, perhaps two, before Jotheth opens his eyes, clearly present again, as he looks to the four of you and gives another very faint smile. "Be exceedingly glad," he says. "My father has chosen to spoken to you, lambs of Isaac." At that moment, what you see in the chair in the center of the room that is flanked to the chair to the left and to the right which Jotheth occupies, is a blinding glow which splits the air in a vertical halo. And the glow emanates outward from the center of the chair, forming the form of a man, or at least a vaguely man-shaped white glow. It's almost blinding to look upon, and you have to squint your eyes as this light splits the air, and he appears out of the ether, almost ethereal. What appears before you is a man with a very elderly-looking man with a long beard and hair, appearing as a luminous, translucent presence, almost as if he were here, not here. He is draped in a simple white monk's robe, contrasting with Jotheth's brown, and there is a smile upon his face, the origins of which are a mystery to you and yet reassure you for some reason. While he seems to be sitting down upon the chair, those who are perceptive may notice that he is actually floating less than an inch above the wood itself. As he manifests, this man begins to speak to the four of you in a strong but gentle voice. "Welcome, my children. I am he who was once Capidocius. I am son of all kindred. Unburden your hearts unto me." He motions to the four of you with a hand, as a father might beckon to children. "Come, tell me your tale, and of how this happened to you."
Valentino.
Oh, go ahead.
Valentino approaches, and then he just falls to his knees at the side of this man. In the sight of such power, he's only heard the one story from Hardestadt, but this is the King of Kings as far as he's ever met. Go ahead.
Gehrman's mouth has dropped, and he's staring with wide eyes at this vision of a man as he slowly and cautiously walks forward and then drops down to a knee as if kneeling on a battlefield, like the warrior he is.
Diego remains on his knee, his hands sort of clasped before him, almost as if he was clutching a rosary, though he doesn't have one. Probably an old habit from his youth. But he's too dumbstruck to speak right now.
Julieta, her right hand had sort of raised to her mouth in awe. Her eyes are wide, much like a doe, and she is just totally blindsided by this unbelievably glowing light around this man who appeared from nothing. She gradually falls to her knees as well, but she stays slightly back away from him. Uh, she's a mixture of fear and disbelief at this point as she looks upon this man, and she kind of only allows her eyes to steer from him to look upon Valentino and Gehrman as they kneel before his feet. They're the closest, and she kind of she out of all of them feels the least worthy to speak to this person. So she awaits for them to address him.
When this apparition of a man speaks, his voice is strong but gentle and resonates across your very skin. The only experience you could compare it to is if you were in a very great cathedral in your life and listened to the singing of Gregorian chanting. That is the only thing you could possibly compare it to. Is it seems to resonate like music across your very body as he speaks. The man in the chair, who is called Capidocius, turns his attention upon Valentino, where he kneels before him, and lifts a hand to beckon towards him. Valentino de Vaya, come, tell me of how this thing happened to you, of how you came before me today.
Yes, of course. He slowly gets up and approaches. My lord, Brother Japheth is in grave danger. The ones who created us so few nights ago, they have plans to destroy Japheth. My companions and I here, we followed them. We tracked them to a city called Belgrade. We engaged with battle with them and slew all but two, Jadwiga Almanov and Augustus Giovanni.
Claudius Giovanni.
Claudius
Gehrman
Giovanni.
whispers as he still hangs his head.
Claudius Giovanni. We fear these two still seek the life of Japheth. We have come here under Hardestadt's bidding to try and prevent this from occurring.
Capidocius listens to your tale with the kind of serenity and repose which he seems to comport himself with, and then turns his attention towards Gehrman de Gascoigne. Crusader Gehrman, rise. Rise and unburden your heart unto me.
The words seem to vibrate through Gehrman to his very heart, as if he can almost feel his heart beating again. And as he hit with nerves that grip him, he slowly begins to rise on shaky legs.
Capidocius watches you patiently with a beatific smile on his face.
We were all, and he motions to his companions, invited to a banquet. Giovanni's invitation. When we were yet alive, his voice seems to tremble. We were their meal. They set upon us, drank from us, but decided to turn us into weapons. when Lord Hardestadt had sieged their castle. They used us as a diversion so they could get away. But we survived. And we tracked them to Belgrade, as Valentino had said. And in doing so, we had learned that they were going to bring us upon this mission, their mission. He struggles to speak still. Something came over me as I attacked my own sire, a man, Marquetus. Marquetus the Bold, they called him. And in my rage, I fought. We, as the motions with a hand, we fought. But Claudius Giovanni seemed to have a power over my body and ours, and it managed to escape with Lady Jadwiga. I struggle, my lord, still, with the thought of who I am, and what I once was. But if there is any honor or truth left in my body, I tell you this now. This is true. I've seen it.
Capidocius listens to your tale with the same patience and understanding that he showed Valentino, before he shifts his attention to where Diego kneels so reverently upon the earthen floor. He pauses for a moment, looking at him before saying, "Diego Vasquez de Sevilla, rise. Come." He motions with a hand as a father would to a son. "Unburden your heart unto me."
Diego moves as if he's swimming. It's languid, it's forced almost. He rises to his feet and stumbles over, and holds out his arms to Japheth. "My lord, I'm sorry. I don't know what to say. It is as if a pall has been removed from my heart."
Japheth rises to catch you so you don't fall from his seat, but he does not look overly concerned. In fact, he has the same serene, peaceful repose upon his face as he gently guides you towards your place next to your companions and turns to resume his seat. Capidocius smiles and nods before shifting his eyes towards where Giulietta remains, last and alone, the furthest away from this gathering. "Giulietta de Florence, come, rise and unburden your heart unto me." Capidocius motions to you, Giulietta.
If Giulietta had anything, if she still had her human mobilities intact, she probably would have had the most dry lump in her throat. And though she does not, it's still, the human reflex is still there to swallow it as she is addressed by this undying light of holiness. And when he speaks her name, she eventually rises and she takes those few steps needed to reach where he is sitting and stands beside Gehrman. Her eyes are just in wonder as she looks upon this man, and she like Diego, is very much at a loss for words for a moment before she forces herself to speak. "My lord, it is like they say." She kind of catches herself, looking over to the others. They speak the truth. Japheth is in danger. And she kind of looks over to Japheth. And for a moment, she feels this. It's a very conflicting feeling. I don't know if you'd call it guilt, but she acknowledges why she is in this situation in the first place. And even though she knows it's because of her son, she looks back to Capidocius and speaks. I too went to the dinner to meet with Claudius Giovanni. I thought he could help me as a mortal. I thought he could help me get my son back. I was a very selfish woman, and perhaps I still am. She kind of acknowledges even just a small part of some of the horribleness she has been attached to just within these last few nights of being a vampire. And though she doesn't speak it out loud, I'm sure this man of power can kind of read it off of her body as she looks down, somewhat in shame. She can't speak what she has done, but it's kind of written all over her face that even though they're here to help, she in some ways has turned to the darkness of what they've become.
And it is hard not to feel like a chastised child in the presence of a loving and understanding father who already knows your every struggle in the presence of Capidocius. It is a potent and powerful sensation, a feeling which overwhelms you and strips you away from all the pretense and all the facade that you may adopt in the company of other lesser cainites. And as you tell your tale, Julia, and the four of you remain there before Capidocius, he speaks to address all of you. My children, to understand these things requires a wisdom beyond that which you possess. You need the teachings of the Book of Nod. To possess wisdom is to have life beyond life. To lack it is to perish even in life. I ask you now, do you wish this wisdom?
I wish it, Diego says.
Yes, my lord.
Very much.
Julieta kind of looks to the others a moment, but it only takes her a second later to respond, almost in the gang mentality, and agrees with the others. Yes, of course.
Capidocius speaks once more. This, then do. Return to those very Templars who attacked you not an hour before. Forgive them and bless them. When you have done as I say, return to me, and you shall become wise. And with that, Capidocius becomes engulfed with a blinding light that you actually have to squint and not look directly at, lest it hurt your eyes, as he becomes engulfed in that nimbus, that glorious halo which washes over him and then fades into a scar in the air before vanishing completely. Japheth rises from his seat as you are once again left alone with him. Be exceedingly glad, he smiles. My father very rarely appears before us, almost never to other clans, and never to fledglings. You are truly blessed.
Valentino nods silently.
Go hence from go. Follow his instructions and return.
Garamond slowly nods as he struggles to look at Japheth's face, but only steals glances before he looks down at his feet again.
Valentino slowly rises to his feet and bows at the waist. At once.
And as Capidocius had faded into nothing and you are left alone with Japheth, what is Julietta doing?
Once Capidocius is gone, she still feels somewhat of that sense of peace because Japheth is still there, but it isn't as overwhelming as when Capidocius was there. And she feels more at balance with herself. And she looks over to the others as they kind of gain their bearings. And eventually she realizes they need to go back to where the battle took place and forgive these men. And though that hasn't really settled into her brain yet, she kind of does realize they need to leave. And she looks to Japheth. But, my lord, what of you? You are in danger.
And as you speak this, Japheth looks towards you, Julietta, and gives you a reassuring smile. I shall do as my father bids, he says very simply.
Julietta will, she gives him somewhat of a silent nod, and eventually looks over to Diego to see what he is thinking. But something is somewhat unsettled in her, and she's I think the better way to describe it is, out of all of them, she feels the most out of place here, and she's feeling very torn, because, like I said before, one part of her being in front of these very holy beings is making her feel somewhat, I don't know if I would say guilty, but it's kind of close to that in terms of her life, even before she was turned into a beast. And then there's another part of her that feels as though things happen and she was justified for what she had to do, which is probably very much different than how the others feel. Or it could be the same. She's just a little bit torn about it. But she looks to Diego to see what he might say or do.
Diego comes to almost as if awakening from a dream. It's much like it was when he was staring at the stars for so long on their original journey away from their creators. And he turns to look at Japheth and then turns to look at the rest and nods, simply saying, "We must do as he says."
Garmin will slowly nod as he is still kneeling, and then he'll rise to see Japheth and his companions, and he'll slowly bow before Japheth as he looks to them, his companions, and then turns on his heel to walk out and follow after Valentino.
So with that, does everyone depart from the room?
Yes, Julietta would follow the others.
Diego does hesitate because it's almost like leaving the arms of a loving mother, but he does in the end follow.
Finding your way out of the monastery is not hard, and the camera fades out as the Lambs of Isaac turn to vanish into the catacombs towards the surface of the monastery of St. Timothy. And with that, we're going to change scene. As we go now. We open our next scene as the camera pans down to see the four Lambs of Isaac walking along the road, those young cainites. The four of you have been walking back in the direction of the ambush site for some time, silent amongst yourselves, left to contemplate what you had just witnessed in the bowels of the monastery of St. Timothy, left to contemplate what was said to you with the reverberation of Capidocius's strong but gentle voice still vibrating throughout your skin and singing in your skull. Still contemplating what he had said to you, as if holding on to every word as though there were precious wisdom in it somewhere. Unable to really converse, and yet, now that you are perhaps a good mile or two away from the monastery, it is far out of sight after all. And as you approach the ambush site where you had committed such hideous violence not a few hours before, and you smell the blood on the wind and know that you are drawing closer, I'm going to turn the scene over to the four of you as you walk, and perhaps you stay silent, perhaps you find your voice, but the camera focuses in on you.
Valentino, no longer enthralled by the presence of Capidocius and Japheth, feels the returning sharpness of his hunger, and he realizes that the peace he felt was simultaneously very discomforting. He did not feel worthy. Kind of similar to Julieta, he felt that he was more on the road of becoming this monster, and so to be faced with a kindred who was so well adjusted was jarring to him. And he speaks up to his companions on the road. Those two, I don't know what to make of them.
Gehrman seems troubled at this as he slowly lifts his head and speaks to Valentino. And they are still kindred, they still feed upon the living. How do they keep such holy demeanor when they must feed upon the living?
Can't you see why? Diego says. Because this thing we have been given is not a curse, it's a miracle.
Miracle. Gehrman utters the word as his head continues to hang and his hands upon his hips as if contemplating while they walk.
Claudius Giovanni and his lapdogs have corrupted what they've been given, but it doesn't make it any less true. Okay, so now I know this.
And perhaps they are no different. Some choose the path of divinity, and some the path of the wicked.
Diego looks to... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Of the many kindred we've seen, or those we have seen, most of them seem as monsters to me. I feel as though their quality, Capidocius and Japheth, is quite the exception. I do not feel I could ever achieve that much clarity. It seems impossible.
Julieta will. She's quietly contemplating what the others are saying, but at Valentino's last words, her dark hues would rise up, and she would look over to him and speak somewhat thoughtfully at that. I have to agree with you. She nods, looking forward and realizing they're getting closer to the spot where the battle took place, and the dead bodies of those knights are lying that they had not just killed but destroyed. And she's feeling somewhat conflicted about what Capidocius has asked them to do. She kind of looks back to Gehrman at this point and says, I do not know if I should even forgive them. She kind of shrugs. Because in her eyes, these men, though in their, they were mortal, and in their mortal life they were fighting for something holy, they were attacking them. And to her, she went into survival mode.
I must concur. I did not feel great grief in striking these men down, though we would be remiss to refuse such a great power as Capidocius on his request.
I am conflicted, Diego says. On the one hand, yes, they did attack us. It was horrible, and they died for it. On the other, they were men of God, see? Why did we not ask them for forgiveness?
They did their duty. As Gehrman speaks up under his breath, they did theirs and we did ours. But we must forgive them. As Capidocius has said, forgiveness unburdens the heart. And I believe that is what Capidocius aims to do for us. He wishes us to see the horrors that we have done, forgive them, so that we may move on and move past it. That is what forgiveness is.
And almost appropriately, as soon as Gehrman finishes speaking this, you smell the blood on the wind. You smell the stench of freshly cut meat as these bodies have not yet begun to decay, as you round the corner around a copse of trees and you see in the distance the carnage that you had wrought. You see the bodies that are strewn across the road and lines of blood trailing back to a decapitated corpse, and others that have been stabbed, and they lay completely in death, and as you look upon them, you know with a certainty that they are dead. It is undeniable, their eyes staring blankly off into forever, their faces twisted in their last looks of rage or agony or terror. There are many faces twisted in terror there. All of these men strewn and bloodied and butchered.
Gehrman is gonna slowly walk his way through the carnage in the battle as he takes a small moment to look upon each face that has been slaughtered or dismembered in some way as he nods to each of them, but he's looking directly for the body of Bauduin Le Breton.
You find him crumpled in the midst of the most carnage, left where you had fallen. You see that he has been stabbed in many places in his body, and his throat has been cut, and he lay there bleeding out in small, tiny trickles. What was once a river and that has congealed underneath him in the blood and the dust of the road has become a slow trickle from the torn arteries in his body. He stares outward forever.
Gehrman will take a moment to stare upon him and then slowly kneel down on both knees right next to the body as he leans over him and begins to say a prayer in Latin.
And as Gehrman kneels over the body of Bauduin Le Breton, the camera is going to shift back to the three of you at the edge of the carnage as to what you're doing as Gehrman continues to pray.
It's not right, Diego says. We should bury them. We can't leave them here to rot.
Julieta will look from Diego to Valentino as Diego speaks, and then eventually she looks up over to the decapitated body of the man that she had so viciously attacked. And eventually she will saunter over to him in her dirty dress and weathered hair, and she'll look down upon the corpse. His head, which had rolled out of her slender fingertips, is kind of a little ways to the right side of him now, and she looks from his head to his corpse and then back to his head again, and kind of pauses a moment before speaking somewhat aloud. If the others are near, they might be able to hear her, and she says a simple, "I forgive you." But it's so slack in emotion, and they probably pick up on that, and it's almost as though she says it out loud to make it seem as though she means it, but on the inside, she sort of doesn't.
Valentino makes his way over to the man that he dragged his blade across in one fell strike, probably very close to Gehrman. And when he approaches, he kneels down and he thinks about the one slash he used to bring this man from whatever previous life he held to just this bloodied, rotten corpse. And he clasps the hilt of the sword he used to do it with, just staring at the corpse, uncertain whether or not he actually could bring himself to really forgive a man that he never thought was an unjust kill. And so he sits there in silence and contemplation nearby Gehrman.
Diego moves over to Bauduin's body, since he was the only one he actually killed on this. And Gehrman is still there, yes?
Yes.
So he'll kneel down next to him. I forgive you for doing what you thought was right, and I hope you find your peace with God. He lays a hand on the man's bloody, matted hair.
And as Gehrman is speaking in Latin, rounds out his prayer. Et ne nos inducus in tentationem, sed libera nos a malo. Amen. As he makes the sign of crucifixion over his body, he stares at Badiou's body as he slowly begins to say, I was you. This could be me here. And I forgive you. As he slowly closes Baudian's eyes. And I hope you can forgive me. His head drifts to the heavens as he begins to scan the stars, trying to gaze upon something further.
The camera pans to where Valentino is amidst the carnage.
Valentino, finally, after several moments of staring at the man and still holding the hilt, finally stands up and solemnly shakes his head. No. I feel nothing for this man. And there is nothing to forgive here. And he walks away.
Surprisingly, Diego says, I agree. For what I did to this man, I feel nothing but shame. I exulted in this power that I have. He shakes his head and then lowers it.
Gehrman stays knelt for a few moments longer before he stands and looks around at the other bodies and then to his companions. Shall we bury them?
I do not see the need for that. He says this very coldly and matter of fact.
The words cast Gehrman's eyes back down to Baudium's body.
And just as you say this, something has begun to happen. There is nothing left here but the wind and the silence of the grave with the dead all around you, and yet, even as you do look around, you see twitches in muscles, fingers jerking, thumbs working as their limbs begin to twitch, and the bodies of the dead begin to stir all around you. As you do so, the dead begin to rise, and before your very eyes, their wounds, though they hang rictus and morbid upon their bodies, their wounds begin to close as they arise, almost as though they were puppets upon strings. They appear to have been struck mute by the experience of their deaths, and they do not take up their swords again. They do not attack you. Indeed, they do not even seem aware of you, their milky, glassy eyes staring off into the distance. Julietta, where you stand, or where you are near the beheaded corpse of the man you had killed, his body rises of its own accord and turns to shamble over to where his head lay upon the ground. With a stilted, jagged, and uneven movement, he leans over with arms that still twitch and jerk from the strain of coming back to life, grasping his severed head and bringing the stump of the neck to his shoulders, where you see the wounds seal and close up as he reattaches his severed head. The men stand there, like a forest of trees, gazing off into the distance, making no noise. Baudian himself rises and looks directly at you in the face, Gehrman, though he does not see you at all. He sees nothing.
Julieta is freaked out, and she jumps backwards at this, watching as the man stumbles about to grab hold of his head and reattach it to himself, and her hand raises up to her mouth as she alarmingly looks at the others.
Valentino quickly backs away and reaches his hand across to pull his sword out, expecting something terrible. His mouth slightly agape.
Gehrman begins to back away from Baudian. His mouth is agape and shocked at the man he had just forgiven and hopes had forgiven him, has instead risen up to meet him.
Diego scrambles backward in the dirt, trying to find purchase with his feet and hands so that he can push himself away from these bodies that are rising. "This is Giovanni's magic," he says. "We have seen it before."
Julieta, when she hears Diego, immediately she looks over to him and then past him into the forest. She's looking for any sight of Giovanni and Jadwiga.
Gehrman is going to quickly try to scramble for a sword as he backs up towards the others. Backs together. As he issues a command to the others.
Valentino obliges and backs up to Gehrman, sword out.
For once, Julieta listens to Gehrman, and she saunters her way to him and Valentino, pushing her back to theirs.
Be ready. If this is Giovanni, we know he has the power of invisibility. We've seen it. Be ready for anything.
And as you remain there, ready for any kind of impending conflict from the rising of the corpses, you realize that, eerie though it is, they stand there, their bloody matted hair blowing in the wind and staring off into the distance, making no noise, as silent as the grave itself, standing there, just utterly still, like a copse of morbid trees on the road. They do not take note of you or their weapons on the ground, or indeed anything at all. In fact, they just simply stare off endlessly into the distance, and as the seconds grow into minutes, and the four of you wait for an attack that never comes, a sense of eerie and most unsettling, or perhaps anxiety would be a better word, slow creeping terror at what you're actually seeing and not able to readily comprehend what is happening, overcomes the four of you as you await for, as I said, an attack that never comes.
We should leave this place at once.
Hold. Gehrman says as he begins to walk towards the bodies. He's going to begin examining them. For if they were truly enemies and they were going to attack, they would have done so already.
Why do they not attack? Where is Giovanni?
not sure. He's gonna nudge one of them with his arm on their shoulder. Just give them a slight nudge.
The one that you nudge drifts like a blade of grass, or perhaps the branch of a tree, but he does not make any indication of being aware of you at all. In fact, he makes no noise and remains standing.
They clearly require no burial now. Gehrman, we must leave.
Gehrman looks back towards Valentino. They are dead, yes?
There's something else.
We have truly forgiven them. We must give them their rest.
Julieta, as the two of them banter back and forth and these undead are standing around, she looks over to Diego for a moment to see what he's doing.
Strangely enough, Diego looks almost listless. Almost as if he doesn't care what's happening.
And as the four of you speak amongst yourselves, suddenly, as though acting as one, they all turn and lurch forward in slow, halting steps in the direction of the monastery from which you had come. They take no note of each other or indeed anything else. In fact, one of them brushes your shoulder, Valentino, as he staggers past. Their wounds are gone, their mouths are sealed shut, and yet their skin is pale and pallid as their eyes stare blankly offward. They walk in the direction of the monastery of St. Timothy as almost all at once they do this, turning and slouching in that direction, completely ignoring the four of you.
Gehrman begins to quickly move back towards his companions. No, something is wrong. Quickly. We must return to Capidocius.
Agreed. He sheathes his sword.
Let's pick up the pace. We must beat them. And then Gehrman will start taking off into what looks like a pretty hastily jog as he begins running down the road.
Julieta nods and follows, running after him.
Who are you guys waiting for? Me?
No, I think everyone's just kind of quiet. But what is Valentino doing?
Oh, he agreed. He's going with Gehrman.
Okay. All right, the camera's going to focus on Diego.
Diego seems to, with some force of will, pull himself from whatever black pallor has fallen over his psyche. And he will follow after the others, although he takes a few almost uncaring looks back over his shoulder.
And as the Lambs of Isaac turn together to outpace the risen Templars, which now stagger in the direction of the monastery of St. Timothy, hurrying to return to Japheth and perhaps even Capidocius himself. The camera pans up high into the air and fades out into black as we end our scene. And we break now, for we're at the 2-hour mark. So everybody go ahead and take 10 minutes, and we'll get back into it.
Cool.
So, you guys met an antediluvian. That happened.
That was awesome.
That was awesome.
But it broke Diego, unfortunately.
I almost asked if we could bring the horses back out. We went back to the Crusaders, but I'm like, oh, it won't. It'll be fine.
Yeah, it's fine. We don't need that. Man, what the hell is going on?
Zombies. Zombies and antediluvians.
Yeah, meeting Japheth and Capidocius is gonna have an effect on Garamond, for sure. That's some pretty heavy shit.
Yep.
Yep.
So yeah, you guys have been hearing about Japheth for this whole story, and now you finally meet him. Like, this is the guy Giovanni wants to destroy or diablerize or something.
God, Giovanni is such a scumbag, dude. I want to stop him. I'm gonna straight up stop that from happening. It's gonna be sweet. Kick Giovanni's ass. Scumbag. Rat face. Fucking dick. I'm sitting over here stewing.
I'm gonna fucking beat him up. It's gonna be sweet.
Beat his ass. Fuck pose. Fuck bitch.
Alright, I'll be right back.
Okie doke.
Welcome back.
Thank you, sir.
I'm back too!
Welcome back, Skin.
We're playing Wraith, right?
Yeah. I'm your
I
shit.
died in a fire! Oh, you are?
Yeah.
Cool, offer me power.
Okay.
I'll take it.
And you lose.
And I descend into the abyss immediately. Oblivion reaches out for me. And I become a specter. Is it just really quiet or am I like freaking out?
I'm back.
Ah!
Hi.
Wish I could do the Wilhelm scream.
So, about that humanity.
Who needs it?
Getting pretty low.
Are you starting to look like a monster?
Not quite. Not far from it.
Is it just me, or does the picture he used for Joffith look like that guy from the Vikings? What's his name? The priest.
Yeah.
Athelstan?
Athelstan, yeah.
Yeah,
I
I think
said-
it is.
Yeah.
It's a great picture. I like
Yeah, it is a good picture.
It's George Blagden and he's too handsome to be alive.
I'm back. What are we talking about?
George Blagden.
Oh,
Athelstan from the Vikings.
Yeah, I said the picture that you picked for Joffith kind of looks like that guy.
yeah, it is him.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I'm like, that looks exactly like that guy. Capidocius is old. Like, he's an old man. I don't know why I thought maybe the founders of each clan would be a little younger looking, but I mean,
They
he's
come in all
old.
shapes and sizes, really.
Yeah, that's true.
Capidocius is actually one of the best thought of. Him and Salat, and well, that's it.
That's it.
Troil's a prick. Malkov's an asshole. Absimil Yard is like the worst ever.
Absimiliard? Oh, yeah, absolutely. He's a fucking scumbag if there ever was one.
Yeah, he's king scumbag. Of the dirty, asshole-ish scumbag people.
Yeah, the Niktuku are freaking scary. I mean, even more so in V20, they made him even scarier. In Lore of the Clans, you can read about them.
All right, cool guys. So I think we're past 10 minutes. Is everybody here?
Yep.
Yes.
All right, right on. We ready to get back into this thing?
Reluctantly and hesitantly, yeah.
I know Garamond just got out of torpor. Hopefully he doesn't go back in torpor.
Right.
Back to the abyss with thee!
Jotheth might not be around forever to do that every time.
Yeah.
All right, guys. We're going to open up our next scene. As the four of you had returned to the monastery of St. Timothy about an hour later, you can tell that the sky has begun to lighten just a little bit. Sunrise isn't imminent, but it's definitely less than a couple hours away, as the pitch blackness of the sky has lightened just a shade or two. And as you reach the courtyard of the monastery, you see the monks milling about, praying silently, some of them tending to the gardens, others shuffling about the courtyard, and the door to the main building in the center of the abbey remains open where you had last left it, as though no one had touched it since your absence. And as the four of you make your way inside and down into the catacombs that wind beneath the abbey of St. Timothy, the camera is going to focus in on the four of you as you make your way towards your meeting with Jotheth and perhaps even Capidocius, as you had completed his instructions and now find yourselves returning to that meeting place. So I'm going to turn the scene over to the four of you. If you wish to engage in dialogue, do so. As you advance on the appointed meeting place deep beneath the earth.
Valentina's feeling a lot of anxiety about seeing Jotheth again since the time they've spent out in the field. And he's mostly quiet in thought as they go down through the catacombs.
Diego seems almost angry. Sullen at the very least. Not at the thought of going down to see Japheth. It doesn't seem to be that. It seems to be more an internalized anger that's kind of spilling out onto his waking face.
Julieta is more alert of what's possibly going on. She's adamant about getting down into these catacombs and seeing if Jotheth is all right. It's quite clear from them leaving the area of those corpses that had stood and were making their way to the monastery that Giovanni is near. She knows that. Where he is exactly is very much unclear, and she is somewhat alarmed by this, and she keeps looking over to Garamond to see what he's doing, but in a split second she sees Diego and there's some sort of anger kind of rising to just the surface on his face, and she is a little confused. It takes her a little off guard, so she slows her pace as they make their way down. Make their way down. Yes, I speak English, and and she speaks over to Diego in somewhat of a hushed voice. Are you all right, Diego?
I am not feeling well, he says.
What do you mean?
I am burdened with shame. What this is, that these elders have become, I can never be. I'm just a man. A terrible man at that.
Julieta, there's a moment where she kind of wants to roll her eyes at his words, but then she realizes, she isn't Diego. She doesn't know how he feels, and therefore she's kind of thought of him out of any of these companions she's had over the last few nights as somewhat of a friend, and she's kind of connected with him more than the others. So she holds back some of her more poignant personality traits in order to kind of ease his burden of how he's feeling. And she kind of lifts her hand as they walk down to his shoulder and shakes her head and says, Diego, no, you are not a bad man. She kind of, her voice is very clear, very precise in what she says, kind of showing that she really does mean that, and she doesn't want him to feel this way, especially whatever they end up going into next.
Gehrman is quickly hurrying towards the cathedral. He can't get to Japheth or Capidocius any sooner. He feels much like Sam does, that this is the work of Giovanni, and that maybe his plan is to take place tonight. So he's worried about Japheth, and he wants to get there as quickly as they possibly can.
And I should mention to the four of you, and it was said by Hardestadt, and it's been a while, so you guys probably didn't remember. That's okay. It was found out by Sire Venceslas that the conspiracy of Isaac had planned to set upon Japheth within a week. That was actually in the letter, so just so you guys know.
Within a week or in a week?
In about a week, yeah.
Okay.
That was their original plan, anyway. If plans have changed, you have no idea. But that's what Sire Venceslas said.
Okay.
All right, so is everyone advancing to the meeting place with Japheth?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So as the four of you emerge into the chamber deep beneath the monastery of St. Timothy, you see there the altar and the three chairs, just as you had left them. Japheth is standing next to his chair on his feet to greet you. He smiles as you return and nods, motioning that the four of you enter, welcoming you back. Hello, he greets you. Come in here, my brethren. Come and find peace. And as the four of you filter into the room and approach the chairs that sit in front of the altar behind them, you see that light split the room again and almost blind you at the brilliant explosion of rays that manifest as you see Capidocius materialize once more into the seat in the very center, wearing his white robe and having that long, glowing, luminescent beard, and his eyes, which seem to glow with the cold light of the stars as he manifests and the halo recedes, and he looks a little bit more real as he finishes materializing from the thin air, although he does float just a bit above his chair. You may notice, if you were very perceptive. And as you see Capidocius finish in his appearing, he motions generously to the four of you. Because you have hearkened, you shall hear. And with that, he motions to the ground before him, indicating that you should sit, and Japheth indeed also motions as well.
Valentino, even more so uncomfortable with the presence of these two very saintly figures, reluctantly obliges. My lord, there is news. You must hear. We went as you instructed, but the bodies we found, they rose. They march now here to the monastery. We fear for Japheth's life.
It is by the power of the Lord and your forgiveness that they find a home amongst us as well. When they return, their bodies will be washed and cleansed. They will be clothed, they will be fed, and they will be amongst us, as these monks here are now, amongst the shepherds, as my faithful son watches over them. His flock endures in this place, and they prosper. Capidocius explains, clearly neither of them surprised at the revelation that the Templars are rising and walking towards the monastery.
Did you summon them, my lord?
They are drawn to this place as a matter of their own searching, and we are happy to provide that for them. His answer is very cryptic and leaves you with more questions than answers, but it seems clear that that is all he's willing to say.
Looking towards the others, Gehrman will slowly begin to walk forward, not understanding what he means, but they don't seem worried, so in his presence, Gehrman won't be concerned with it any longer, and he'll go towards where they had motioned and take a seat.
Valentino also takes a seat next to Gehrman.
Japheth smiles to you reassuringly, Julieta, and also to Diego.
Julieta is somewhat unnerved by this. She realizes that some sort of powers these vampires possess can raise the dead, but knowing that, at least this is what I gathered from the description, the monks above are also, is that what you meant? They're also the undead? All those monks up there?
You don't know.
Well, she's not quite sure what to make of this. She kind of uneasily looks back up to the stairs that made their way down into the catacombs, and she's a little bit uncomfortable. But she, being in front of such a powerful presence, she succumbs to it, and eventually she eases her way over to the others and takes a seat. But something just feels amiss to her, and she's a little bit on edge.
Despite what the fact that what's going on goes against the stories he knows from his childhood, Diego is ready to put that aside in the presence of these two saintly figures, and he will move forward and take a seat and allow his sullenness to recede a bit in the light of peace.
I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Was I muted for that whole exposition?
You were. I'm like,
Yeah.
Is somebody talking?
Oh, sorry. As the four of you sit upon the earthen floor and gather before Capidocius, he sits and he folds his hands peacefully in his lap, examining the four of you before he speaks up, and his voice reverberates throughout that small chamber, an almost intimate gathering, the tones of his strong but gentle voice kind of vibrating and humming and thrumming throughout your being as he speaks. There is an old Malkavian tale. When I made a sacrifice of plants and fed upon them, I rose above them to become lord over plants and like unto a god. When I made a sacrifice of animals and fed upon them, I rose above them to become lord over animals and like unto a god. When I made a sacrifice of men and fed upon them, I rose above them to become lord over men and like unto a god. The Malkavians know more of these vital matters than the other clans. They understand that spirit has risen from plants to animals to man, and then also to cainites. We are not accursed by God. We are blessed with life everlasting. You know that our Savior did say, He that eateth my flesh and drinketh my blood dwelleth in me, and I in him. And whoso eateth my flesh and drinketh my blood hath eternal life, and I will raise him up at the last day. But did ye also know that the Gospel of St. Luke says of our Savior, And being in agony he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was as it were great drops of blood falling down to the ground. Blood for sweat, as ye have blood for sweat. What make of you, my children, of these portents? Capidocius pauses as though allowing you to consider his words. As he essentially compared Jesus Christ to sweating blood, as you do.
Valentino has his mouth agape. I do not know if I understand or appreciate what you mean, my lord.
Capidocius turns to look patiently at Gehrman.
As Gehrman sits and ponders all of his knowledge and teachings of the gospel, he looks up to Capidocius. Do you say that Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior, had lorded over us at one point, and thus we cainites must do the same to mortals?
Capidocius smiles but does not answer, turning his attention upon Diego patiently.
You say we are risen above them, as a farmer is to his cattle? He seems somehow surprised by this, but the
And,
anger has left his face.
and finally, Capidocius fixes his attention upon Julietta.
Julietta kind of gives him somewhat of a perplexed look. This is far beyond anything she has ever really taken note of. And she speaks the truth of this by saying, I do not quite know what you mean, my lord.
Finally, Capidocius regards the four of you and resumes his speech. I mean to say our Savior was far more than man or even cainite. But we cainites are a step on the path, from plant to animal to man to cainite, and finally to something else. We are a step closer to God through Cain. God's redemption is even for such as us, for we are not damned. But we needs must have our own sacrificial Lamb of God to redeem the blood of all kindred, just as Jesus Christ redeemed the souls of man. Our Savior said, I am the bread of life. He that cometh to me shall never hunger, and he that believeth in me shall never thirst. I shall come to him, believe in him, consume him, and become him. As kindred feed on man, I shall of God and feed upon him. To rise above kindred, I shall become Lord over all. Just as I had to die to become kindred, so must I die to become God. I must die to my current state, as I once died to my human state. My death must be a form of the crucifixion Jesus Christ experienced. Perhaps not upon a Roman cross, perhaps not even upon a hill, but of some form I must die to my state. My consumption of God must be a sacrament. It must be a perfect act, a pure act of sacrifice for the good of all, even mine enemies.
Okay, at this, Julietta kind of picks up on what he's saying almost immediately, and she looks over at the others, her brow kind of raised, and she can't help it. I mean, even though this man is powerful, I mean, he consumes his presence kind of consumes them. Uh, she looks back to Capidocius and she speaks up quite clearly to him and says, "My lord, are you saying you wish to be God?"
We are the clan of life after death, life beyond death. Death not as an end, but as a beginning, and I am to become the ferryman of souls. The world must be locked into an eternal heaven, a bliss that will never end. I will break the cycle of death and life and rebirth. I will bring us all under God, and we will know at last peace. Where once there was chaos, there will be stillness. Where once there was pain, there will only be peace. Let them that have minds understand. Let them that have ears hear. And let them that have souls know. Amen. I bid thee farewell, and wish thee well, lambs of Isaac. For I know in the coming days you shall bear witness to the beginning. And at this, not with brilliant light, not with fanfare or drama, does he vanish, but he merely fades away as a ghost of a memory. Capidocius vanishes in his seat, leaving you all with the revelation of what he had said. The camera focuses in on the four of you. What are you doing in the wake of this?
Julietta, she looks to the others and she is just aghast. I mean, from one thing to the next, that's just kind of how she's feeling, and she looks over at Japheth, kind of gauging what his reaction is. Um, and it's just she's coming to realize every single person in this new world that they're living in, every clan, they just have their own agenda, and she can't take it seriously. She kind of scoffs. She goes, "Ugh," and starts shaking her head.
And as you look at Japheth, Julieta, you see that his look of serenity, his look of peace, is visibly shaken. In fact, his eyes are wide and he's almost trembling in his hands. So uncharacteristic of someone who had been so calm and collected earlier.
Valentino looks a little dumbstruck, and it takes him a moment to finally gather his wits, and he looks over at Japheth. Brother Japheth, is that even possible?
He does not readily answer you, at least not right away. He seems to be dimly aware of the fact that you're speaking to him. Japheth is looking off into the distance, his mouth open, as he contemplates what he had heard.
It's a parable, Diego says. Like the stories in the Bible. He doesn't really mean to devour God.
Julieta immediately looks over at Diego when he says this. That is exactly what he said, Diego. This is all falsity, she says out loud.
Can't mean it.
He must mean communion, yes? As he looks towards Japheth, that's what he means.
See, Diego says, nodding, wanting to believe it himself.
I will admit that it is more of my father's plans than I have ever heard before. Why he would reveal it to you, But we need to focus on matters of the spirit, not of usury and greed. Unfortunately, and he turns to produce the letter from the folds of his robe and turns it over in his hands as he rises from his seat, perhaps a bit more shakily than you might have expected of him, as he looks down at the letter in his hands. The money changers have entered the temple. We have taken tax collectors into our bosom.
And
What will you do now? Looking at Brother Japheth.
Japheth scowls, but does not reply. A momentary look before the expression vanishes. I shall do as my father bids. But he trails off as though he might speak before finally saying, my father will not accept any of this. His fingers relax and let the letter flutter to the floor, where it rests a useless sheaf of paper on the earth. As Japheth stares off into the distance, he will allow his new grandchild to come here, regardless of Claudius's intention. I am forbidden to intervene. I may only forgive.
Would you allow us to intervene on your behalf? We cannot let harm come to you.
Japheth finally blinks and turns to look at you, Valentino, before saying, I cannot go against my father's wishes and fight any who would attack me. But after a moment of silence, he adds, but I can always aid those in need. I think you might have need of these. And without saying anything, he turns to walk towards the altar, kneeling behind it. He's silent and makes no noise as he walks upon the floor and ascends to the the stone dais where the altar remains. Withdrawing a wooden box, a very simple wooden box, from beneath the altar, he opens this austere container, and he draws out shrouds and ragged cloth boots. They are stitched together of the same humble burlap that his own robes are comprised of, though they are very clearly of a different make. They're not monks' robes, but shrouds for the dead. He withdraws them and lays them out, four shrouds and 4 pairs of boots upon the altar, very carefully and fastidiously. When he finishes, Japheth closes the box and he puts it back under the altar. Mayhap these will help you survive in the maelstrom, as they helped Noah.
Valentino, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. As he speaks that word maelstrom, that is a very unfamiliar word to the 4 of you.
Valentino slowly rises to view this shroud and these pairs of boots. He looks up briefly at Japheth before taking one and kind of running it over in his hands, looking it over.
The shroud appears quite ordinary. You're not sure what about it might be special, but it is a cloak and a hood, the sort of shroud you might dress in a funerary rite of some kind. And of course, there's also the fold of cloth that drapes over your front as well as your back.
Not fully understanding, he takes the shroud and pair of boots. Thank you, Brother Japheth.
The camera focuses on Gehrman to see how he's taking all this in.
Gammon still looks perplexed by the words that still seem to linger from what Capidocius had said and what Japheth had said about Giovanni. But he'll rise and walk forward to take the garments, and he'll look at Japheth and give him a slight bow.
Japheth allows you to take the shroud and the boots from the altar, and smiles very faintly, but it vanishes soon afterward. You can see that something in him has changed, a certain rising of anxiety and less assuredness than he carried in himself before.
Is there anything else you would have us do, Brother Japheth?
I can do no more. As I said, I am forbidden to interfere. I have given you all the help that I am perhaps able or allowed. I may choose to answer a question or two, but when thy business is finished here, you must ascend to the crypts above and find your rest for the coming day, and return to your Hardestadt. Give him the answer of Clan Capidocian, which is that we will endure no matter the cost.
Valentino nods solemnly.
Gehrman will slowly nod as he stares at Japheth, considering his words.
Diego wants to remain peaceful, but that same nagging guilt within him won't let him. And he says, "But you'll die."
Japheth looks at you as you say this, and he doesn't seem to respond. He merely blinks and says, "I can only do as my father wills."
Julieta, when she takes all of this in and looks about at the others, she can't help but be somewhat annoyed at all of this. She looks down at the robes that are offered to her, and she merely scoffs, shaking her head, speaking aloud now as she crosses her arms in front of her chest. "This is ridiculous. This is all blasphemy." She looks over at Gehrman as she speaks, and she knows that the Crusader is probably thinking a lot of what she's thinking. I mean, this is quite unexpected, and she does recall when they were with Hardestadt, when this potential had been arisen to Hardestadt, he kind of brushed it off. But now that they know that it's real and this Capidocius is, really planning on doing this, Gehrman had been, very alarmed when he had heard that, and she's kind of looking to him for some sort of guidance here. I mean, she's not a very religious woman, or, she wasn't a very religious woman, but I mean, this is quite ridiculous, and it's just one thing after another, and she's kind of had it up to here with all of it. But almost immediately after she speaks, she kind of looks down, she sharply kind of looks down, and she grabs at her head. Something's happening to her. She starts hearing these voices, and it hits her so quickly that kind of a small escapes her lips, and the voice says something to her. She doesn't repeat it, but it says something, and it's quite clear. And I mean, she's holding her head, and it's alarming.
Valentino kind of looks over, noticing that Julieta's having some kind of upsetting moment. He kind of puts a hand on her shoulder. "What is it?"
At this point, Julieta is kind of rubbing at her temple. The voice ceases, and she looks up to Valentino and just kind of shakes his hand off of her shoulder and takes a step back. She doesn't want to say what she heard, at least not at this moment, but she just kind of shrugs it off. "Nothing, I'm fine. This is all just a bit overwhelming."
"You are a Malkavian," Japheth says, very matter of fact. No note of surprise in his voice, but you realize it is perhaps an observation that he has made as he He has been looking at you, you realize, Julietta, very calmly from where he has been standing.
Julietta looks up to him, and her chin kind of raises poignantly upwards as she locks eyes with his own. Yes, she says.
Japheth does not say anything further. So the camera is going to shift back to Diego. How is he doing?
He's having a hard time with this, and he doesn't even seem to have noticed what the whole affair going on with Julietta over there. I love my father, he says, but if he asked me to leap from a cliff, I would not do it. My life is my own.
When Abraham asked his son to walk with him to the top of the mountain, his son obeyed, as it is every son's duty to obey his father. And so I will obey mine.
That mode of thought is antiquated.
Are we not creatures of antiquity?
So he kind of just shrugs and huffs. I don't want that snake to have you, now that I've met you. I think the world is a better place with you in it.
Japheth smiles, but he doesn't say anything further. The smile is fleeting, however. You can see the concern on his face. He is no longer as much at peace as when you first arrived.
Gehrman remaining silent and serious in all of this discussion. With the robes and boots still in his arms, he'll turn to Japheth. Your faith in your father is inspiring, Lord Japheth. But the Lord, as you may very well know, works in very different and mysterious ways. Perhaps the best we can do is pray that maybe perhaps he'll work through us and we can put an end to Giovanni's scheme if it holds true.
I know not what my father sees of what is to come, Japheth says very matter-of-factly. Only that he sees far more than you or I ever could. And so, knowing that, I choose to trust in his wisdom and lean on his understanding, as I always have. Though not without difficulty. You see a flash of frustration across Japheth's face before it vanishes just as quickly as it had come, and he beckons to the four of you. Go hence from this place. Rest above, and on the morrow evening return to Hardestadt. Give him our answer.
Gehrman nods solemnly as he gives another bow, and then he'll turn to walk, but he'll take but 3 steps and then turn to see Japheth one more time. Faith would not be faith if it was easy.
Indeed.
And he'll slowly lower his eyes and bow a solemn nod to Japheth one last time, as he'll turn and begin to walk towards the catacombs upstairs.
And as Gehrman makes his exit, the camera pans back to the three of you.
Valentino makes one last plea before turning to leave. He reaches his hand out towards Japheth. Come with us. 'Tis not interfering if you simply come with us tomorrow evening. Is it?
I am the abbot here, the abbot of the monastery of St. Timothy. I am the shepherd, as my father told you, and my flock needs me here. It will be a week hence, when Claudius arrives, that he will find me here. And I will be waiting for whatever comes.
Valentino lowers his hand and looks down, disappointed, and then he turns to follow Gehrman out.
Diego has nothing left to say. He's angry and sad, so he turns and follows as well.
Julieta is the last to leave, and she kind of takes in Japheth one last time. There's lots of things she kind of wants to say to this man, vampire, whatever he thinks he is, but she holds her tongue, and she says no more, turning and following the others. And as they head out towards wherever they were directed, she kind of speaks towards all of them as they walk along. Is everyone we're going to meet on these journeys mad?
Valentino is just quiet.
Julieta looks towards Gehrman after that. You do realize we need to report this to Hardestadt.
Gehrman looks up, and we will do so.
So as the four of you advance upwards, and it seems everyone has fallen silent, is there anything left anyone would like to say or engage in dialogue, or are you retiring for the evening?
We're staying there the day, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Daylight is probably less than an hour away at this point.
Right. Okay.
Valentino lets his pace slacken until he's walking by Julieta again, so he can speak to her kind of in hush voices. Julieta, something upset you, angered you. Now, there are few in this world whom the four of us can truly trust anymore, and we must learn to rely on each other, to trust each other. What was it that angered you?
Julieta turns and looks over to Valentino as he speaks, and her eyes are kind of cast downward in contemplation. But eventually she looks forward and kind of shrugs him off, her jaw tightening a little bit at his I mean, it's clear he noticed what had happened to her, but she tries to play it cool and act as though she's not quite sure what he means. I am fine, Valentino. This is all a little overwhelming. You have to agree with that. It just took me a moment to take it all in, as you were.
Okay, Julieta. Go ahead and make a, let's see. Go ahead and make a manipulation subterfuge roll. Alright, relaying the results of that roll.
So at first Julietta is like very firm about it. She doesn't want to reveal too much. She doesn't want to be vulnerable, especially during everything that's happened. But eventually something kind of softens in her, and as she sees Valentino kind of, and it seems as though he's being genuine, she resides and kind of looks over to Gehrman before speaking back to Valentino in somewhat of a hushed voice. I heard something. I don't know, it was in my mind. It was a voice.
A voice in your mind?
I know, it sounds crazy, but it was there. It was real.
I don't doubt it. I've seen many crazy things these last few nights. What did the voice tell you?
Well, it was rather soft at first, and then it grew very loud, very clear, and it said something along the lines of... And she pauses a moment, trying to recall what it said. And it only takes her a second. I mean, it was very clear to her, and she speaks once more, kind of eyeing him. They wear skins like flails of the dead. The 8th hour and the 9th wind arises from the 7th sun. 8 days before 7 moves into night and feels the future forthcoming. Portents of the wave. And she ends where the voice had ended and kind of looks to Diego, somewhat perplexed. I mean, it sounds crazy what she's saying.
Something of a riddle.
Perhaps. I have no idea what it means. But it does sound rather harrowing, if you ask me.
Can you perhaps write it down for us? It will give us time to think on it.
Julietta looks up. She doesn't realize that Diego overheard them, and there's a moment where her face kind of flashes in fear. She thought she was only speaking to Valentino, but obviously Diego was close enough to hear her, and but she trusts Diego, and eventually she nods. Yes, if we can find some parchment and ink, I could write it down. She says kind of apprehensively, but she nods.
Let us get us some rest for the day and think on this tomorrow.
Julietta, since she's had this kind of this whole time she's been with these men, she hasn't really fully opened up to them and shown herself to them as much as they have to each other, and she kind of feels somewhat better that she's told them what's happened, like what she heard, but it is hard for her to open up to people, and in that moment she feels somewhat this small sense of fear kind of fall over her as she looks to them and she says, "Do you believe I really will go mad?" And she looks to them, wanting their honest answer.
I do not believe so. As sadistic as your sire was, she still seemed to have her wits about her well enough to maintain herself. And he fumbles on his words slightly, knowing that the comparison is not a reassuring image.
And what is Garamond doing as all of this conversation is going on in the catacombs tunnels?
I don't know. I guess I just don't understand the setting. Are we still walking towards the catacombs?
No, the three of them have paused. They're kind of lingering in the catacombs and they're talking.
Oh, Garamond would not have paused unless he was specifically addressed. He would have just continued on to where they were to sleep for the day.
Okay, Garamond, so as you continue on, you only hear conversation, little snippets of voices carrying down the tunnel behind you as you move on to your rest for the day.
Okay.
So the camera's going to pan back to the three who are gathered together talking about madness and Julietta's vision.
If you do go mad, I'll go mad right alongside you.
Julietta actually smiles at this, and somewhat of a small laugh escapes her as she reaches out and touches Diego's arm. That was a kind thing to say to her, because at this point she is slightly feeling as though there are moments where she's losing herself. And it's not just the beast, it's something more than that. And she's kind of pushed it away this whole time, but now that this voice has spoken to her, it's kind of hit her. And the reality is, when she spoke to that woman back at Hardestadt's manor, she clearly told her that, her clan's curse was madness, and that this would happen to her. There was no way of running from it. But, it's good to be somewhat humorous about it so you don't cry. And eventually she kind of squeezes his arm some, in a tender way, before nodding and turning away from them to follow behind Garamond and to get some rest for the day.
Valentino follows in tow.
Diego pauses a moment. His face looks as uneasy as ever, but then shortly thereafter he follows.
And with that, we'll end the scene as the camera fades out and the four of you go to ground for the day as you rest in the catacombs of the monastery of St. Timothy. You manage to find shelves for yourselves amidst the coffins and the bones and the old dust. Normally it would have been a terrifying place if you were human, but with the impending rise of the dawn and the dark, cool, secluded shelves that have been carved into the walls seem rather inviting rather than terrifying, you do find a place amidst them. And as you, as the sun rises and brings you all into sleep, we're going to fast track as the day goes by. And with everyone rising for a new evening, go ahead and mark yourself off 1 blood point as you all rise. And as you do so, we're going to talk a bit out of character about what your intentions are, where you guys intend to go as a group now, and sort of your your agenda for the night and your goals as to what you mean to do.
Valentino would suggest to the group that they return immediately to Hardestadt's castle and report the news of Japhet's answer and Capidocius' plans, and basically get them in the loop.
Okay, and how would everyone respond to that?
Diego's clearly interested in getting some help from someone older and wiser. And he sees in Hardestadt, even though Hardestadt is prone to fits of temper, that he does have that wisdom, and perhaps he can help save this man that he's instantly fallen in love with almost. As a follower would love a priest in any case.
Julietta would agree with Valentino. She's not doing it because she, is worried about Japhet, because in a lot of ways she feels as though he's done exactly what kind of warned them about. I mean, it seems as though this clan is very lenient about what goes on around them and even dangers that surround them. And she's kind of like, well, I mean, the only thing that we can do is go back and report to them what we heard. So she agrees.
Gehrman's kind of a sound mind with the group. He still wishes to stop Giovanni, but it seems that the Capidocians have other means of dealing with the situation. So if they are not going to take action against Giovanni, then he feels it is his duty to do so, to stop him and to save Japhet. And to do so, they need aid. They need help from the very man that sent them here in the first place, is Hardestadt and his Camarilla.
All right, so with everyone in agreement to return to Castle Deverick and to speak with Hardestadt, we're going to go ahead and flash through that journey. You take your horses. There are two of them, of course, from the stables of the monastery of St. Timothy, and provided them with the hooded monks who move listlessly about in the beginning of the evening. They're going about their chores with a sort of single-minded purpose that looks rather a little eerie. None of them talk. There's no conversation amongst them, although it's perhaps not so much out of place in a monastery, especially where monks have chosen to take a vow of silence. But you depart without much fanfare. You do not see Japhet, however, as you leave, and neither do you see Capidocius, but the gardens of the monastery look absolutely beautiful, as they are very carefully tended. And as you exit on the road and ride towards Castle Deverick, there are only two horses, so who are riding and who is walking this evening?
Diego's actually happy to walk. It'll give him. It helps him think. Let's put it that way.
Are we still able to ride with one person back saddle?
It's possible, yes.
Julietta would probably ride with Valentino then.
And Gehrman will be riding the other horse.
Okay, so with Valentino and Julietta upon one horse, Gehrman on the other, and Diego taking stride near the group, the four of you move down the road away from the monastery of St. Timothy back to the main road, which leads back west towards Deverick Castle. And as you do go through the journey over the course of the night, it only takes you about, I say only, it takes about 6 hours to get back to Castle Deverick, at least at that speed. And the night is well and full into swing. It's about the dead of night when you finally arrive, and the lights on the castle are lit with torches on the ramparts, and of course there's patrols of Hardestadt's men. They see you approaching, and you hear the calls for the portcullis to be raised and the drawbridge to be lowered. And as the four of you advance,
Actually, um, on the ride over, would there be time for us to converse briefly?
sure, if you wish to engage in a little chat, we can go there to the road.
Just somewhere along the road, uh, since Julieta is sitting behind him, um, Valentino kind of, especially as they approach Hardstadt's castle and it gets within sight, um, Valentino starts to speak up, only to Julieta and only within her earshot. Julieta, there's something you should know. Raphael, one of the cainites with Hardestadt, he can read our minds. They are aware of the status of Marquetas. Our conversation last night, I meant for that transparency to be genuine. And I hid this from you previously, but I reveal it to you now, so that you do not go into this unaware of their knowledge.
All right, one moment. All right, resume scene.
So when Valentino speaks to her and reveals this, almost immediately her back straightens like a feline and she jerks herself backwards. And her hands kind of tighten around his upper arms, his shoulders, as she glares at him and says, "What?" And it's clearly audible. I mean, Gehrman and Diego hear her when she says this. And she's just staring at Valentino in disbelief. So many things are running through her mind. I mean, what sort of game is he playing? She revealed a lot to him last night. She kind of let that wall down in herself, and she opened up to him and to Diego, and now he's telling her this now, and she's just kind of looking at him in disbelief, and she shakes her head and speaks. No, I don't believe you. I don't believe you, she says, and her lip kind of snarls upwards in this vague indignation as she kind of stares at him sidelongingly, and she just feels as though there's something else at play here. What is his goal? What's he doing?
Gehrman is going to rear his horse as he kind of turns to the two talking. What's the matter?
You two should hear this as well.
And how is Diego responding to this sudden confrontation that's brewing?
He'll actually stop and watch the two of them. He'll wait for it to get more heated before he intervenes, though.
The man with Hardestadt, by the name Raphael, he can read our minds, at least to some extent. They are knowledgeable of the state of Marquetas back in Belgrade. I discovered this in a private discussion with Hardestadt.
Their intentions?
Hardestadt did not explain any intentions, but I received quite the berating for it. I believe I've more or less inadvertently taken responsibility for the act. But I thought you all should be aware of their powers, and given what we've seen the last several nights, I think it should come as no surprise that this is within their skill set.
There is like somewhat of a flash of like rage that crosses Julieta's eyes as she's listening to him, and she, in her mind, she just, more than anything, she feels this tingle in her hands to just wrap her hands around his neck and pop off his head. It comes and goes so quickly though, and she knows it's coming from someplace very transfixed, but she also is consumed. Like, she feels as though he's lying, and he's lying to the others, and she can't trust him. What sort of plans does he have, and how is he involving Hardestadt in this? And more consuming than anything else is the fact that he does he know of her plans that she had made with Vlad? I mean, she never had revealed to the others what plans she had made with the Count. And this alarm is just kind of sitting on her chest, but she does manage to control herself. And the tingling that kind of forms in her fingers, she finds somehow she finds the power to just kind of gently release Diego's arms, because I mean, her hands were kind of digging into him and the rage was there, and she suddenly just doesn't trust him. Yeah, Valentino's arm, sorry.
And what else did he say, Hardestadt, when he bereamed you?
Little else. He told me that there was some way for Raphael to read our thoughts as the four of us stood before him, and I don't fully understand all of their powers, but we should go into this eyes open.
Gehrman seems restless as he begins jerking at the reins of his horse to keep it circling back and forth. And what of Marquetas? What are his intentions?
He did not reveal them to me.
Gehrman kind of scowls and grimaces a little as he pulls the horse. So Raphael can read our thoughts, so it's best not to lie.
Precisely.
Very well. But it is best you not keep information like this for like you have for so long.
Yes, why wait until we are returning to them?
I did not want to cause any more problems while we already face the challenge of Japheth, but it is very important information now.
I'll say he might have us strung up and burned.
If he wanted to do that, I don't think he would have let us leave. We've already proven our usefulness to him in any case.
Yes, as tools. But if we prove ourselves untrustworthy, he will discard those tools, and we cannot let that happen.
Indeed.
At this point, Julietta, her whole, she's kind of had tunnel vision upon Valentino as this conversation has opened up and transpired around them, and the feeling of untrustworthiness is lingering in her, and eventually she would snub him and slip her leg behind him, and she would find her way slipping down from the horse. Even if it's stumbling, I mean, because she's not quite capable of handling herself upon a horse, but she really doesn't care at this point. She doesn't want to be anywhere near Valentino. And as she kind of stumbles to the ground, she would dust herself off and walk over to Diego, lifting her chin somewhat towards their direction. "I'll walk,"